The midterm elections, for all practical purposes, are here, and many Americans are reporting significant related stress. Some experts are referring to it as election stress disorder. Although it's not an actual medical diagnosis, experts say experiencing higher levels of stress and anxiety during election cycles can be real for some. A recent survey from the American Psychological Association shows 2/3 of adults say the current political climate is a significant source of stress in their lives, and more than 3/4 are stressed about the future of our nation.
Difficulty getting to sleep or waking up early and not being able to let go of that. For some people, they experience it physically. They may have GI upset or headaches or just feel shaky, not be able to relax, not be able to concentrate.
Experts say election stress also comes from the feeling of not being in control. The pandemic, inflation, and other factors also significantly increase stress and anxiety for many. That's why it's important to control what you can, like casting your vote tomorrow. Hospitalization rates for the flu are at a decade high. That's according to officials with the CDC, who also said that the more severe cases are among people aged 65 and up and young children. The agency estimated that overall there have been 1.6 million cases of the flu so far this season, as well as 13,000 hospitalizations and 730 deaths. Additionally, states in the southeast are seeing cases with extremely high levels of flu-like illnesses. The rise comes as other respiratory viruses, including RSV, are also spreading early and rapidly. The CDC also noted that the flu vaccinations are down in both kids and adults compared to before the pandemic, although up in children from last year. Consuming a diet high in processed foods could lead to early death. Researchers from Brazil modeled data from dietary surveys to estimate baseline intakes of ultra-processed foods. They also found that over 500,000 adults aged 30 to 69 died prematurely in 2019 after consuming large amounts of highly processed foods. High consumption of these foods has been associated with an increase in certain diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer, as well as all-cause mortality. When it comes to edible sweetness, Nestle's is well known. Up next on Valley News Live at 5, why it's recalling some of its chocolate chip cookie dough.